Amelie Chisoro, 27, had always felt like she lived in her younger brother Kofi's shadow. While she spent late nights coding, studying, and hustling to pay her own bills, Kofi, 22, seemed to float through life, charming everyone and getting everything handed to him. Birthdays, school fees, even small things like laptops or bikes for projects. Kofi always came first. Amelie never complained. She quietly paid her own tuition, fixed her own broken laptop, and even helped him buy a motorbike, convincing herself it was fine, that family was family. One evening, Amelie was passing the living room when she overheard her parents talking. She froze just outside the doorway, heart tightening. Kofi's business plan has real potential. We should fund him fully. Amelie? She's smart, yes, but she doesn't need anything right now. The words hit her like a punch. Amelie forced a small smile, pretending not to hear. She had grown used to hiding her hurt, pretending everything was okay, while feeling invisible. Later that night, alone in her tiny studio apartment, she sat at her laptop, working on a freelance project. The soft glow of the screen illuminated her tired eyes as memories of all the sacrifices she'd made flooded her mind. The late nights, the second jobs, the missed vacations, while her family spoiled Kofi endlessly. Something inside her shifted. It wasn't anger exactly, it was determination. She realized she had been invisible for too long, but no more. She would prove, to everyone and herself, that she was more than capable. That night, a quiet fire sparked inside Amelie, a fire that would not be ignored. Sunday dinner in the Chisoro family home in Kabwe started like any other. Laughter, the clinking of cutlery, and the aroma of roasted chicken filling the air. But by the time Amelie's father cleared his throat, the warmth in the room evaporated. "We've decided that Kofi will inherit the family business, the house, and the savings," he said, his voice calm but firm. Amelie's fork froze midway to her mouth. Her mother didn't even try to soften the blow. "Amelie, this is fair. You have everything you need already," she said, looking at her as if she expected a smile, maybe even a nod of gratitude. But Amelie couldn't smile. Her hands trembled slightly as her mind raced. Every late night she had worked to pay her own bills. Every time she had asked for a little support and been brushed aside, flashed before her eyes. The years of sacrifices, the unpaid tuition, the nights she spent fixing her own laptop while Kofi got the newest gadgets. It all came crashing down at that moment. Her father's smile widened, waiting for the appreciation he expected. Amelie only nodded politely, keeping her voice calm but her thoughts burning. She excused herself after dinner and retreated to her room, shutting the door softly behind her. Her phone buzzed on the bedside table. She picked it up, heart sinking. "We're done, Amelie. Don't call us again," read her mother's text. Shock, hurt, and disbelief twisted in her chest. The family she had loved and devoted herself to had officially written her off. Not because she lacked talent or effort, but simply because she wasn't Kofi. Her parents had chosen to ignore her achievements, her sacrifices, and the person she had become. Sitting on the edge of her bed, Amelie let the silence of her room absorb the pain. Tears pricked her eyes, but underneath them, something stronger began to grow. She realized in that moment that she didn't need their approval to define her worth. Their decision, their favoritism, could not stop her. A quiet determination settled in her heart. She would rise not for them, not for Kofi, but for herself. That night, Amelie understood something crystal clear. She was done being overlooked. For days after that dinner, Amelie withdrew into herself. She stopped answering calls from family and barely replied to messages from friends. Her friends noticed the silence, worried, but Amelie couldn't explain what was churning inside her. Even Lindau, her mentor at work, sensed it. There was a tension in Amelie that hadn't been there before, a quiet storm brewing. In the solitude of her small apartment, Amelie began to journal. She poured out every unfair moment, every slight that had piled up over the year. She wrote about how Kofi always got the newest gadgets while she patched up her old laptop for months. She remembered the family vacations she skipped because money was tight, while Kofi got lavish gifts for his so-called dream project. Every late night she had worked multiple jobs to pay her tuition while Kofi was handed cash, and praise seemed suddenly more vivid, more painful. Late one night, sitting cross-legged on the floor with her laptop open, Amelie scrolled through messages from her father. His texts praising Kofi's initiative made her hands shake with anger. And then it hit her. If she kept playing by their rules, keeping quiet, being patient, she would always be invisible. She would always be the smart but unneeded daughter. The realization burned through her like fire. She didn't have to wait for their recognition. She didn't have to beg for approval. Her anger, which had once felt heavy and paralyzing, started to transform. It became fuel. She began researching ways to secure her future, looking into investments, online business opportunities, and skills she could monetize. Every article she read, every idea she explored, made her feel a little stronger, a little more in control. Amelie realized something powerful that night. She didn't need their approval, their praise, or their inheritance. She needed something far greater, her own independence, her own empire. She would build something that no favoritism could overshadow, something that was hers alone. And in that quiet, determined moment, Amelie felt a spark of hope for the first time in years. A fire had ignited, and it would not be put out. Amelie knew she couldn't rely on her family, so she made a decision. She would quietly build her own life, her own wealth, without anyone noticing. While Kofi continued to bask in their parents' constant support, getting new gifts, trips, and cash for every idea he had, Amelie began to lay the foundation for her future. She decided to start a fintech consulting business aimed at helping small businesses in Lusaka manage their finances better. It was perfect. Her years of coding, freelancing, and problem-solving had given her the skills to make it work. At first, it was slow. She spent nights drafting proposals, reaching out to small business owners, and pitching her services. She learned to be patient, to build credibility one client at a time. Every small win felt huge: a signed contract, a client referral, or a business thanking her for helping them grow. Each success quietly fueled her confidence. Meanwhile, her parents remained completely unaware. They assumed Amelie was just getting by, struggling quietly, while Kofi received the spotlight: a brand new car, a stylish studio apartment, and the latest expensive laptop to fuel his business ideas. Amelie smiled to herself sometimes, imagining their surprise if they ever found out how much she was really achieving. She set up a separate bank account in her name alone, carefully documenting every transaction and keeping her finances airtight. Slowly, she began to feel the thrill of independence, the sense that she was finally in control of her own life. Kofi might inherit the family business and their money, but Amelie realized something far more valuable. She would inherit freedom. She could make her own decisions, set her own pace, and define success on her own terms. The more she worked, the more she understood the power she held. No one could take away her skills, her drive, or her vision. While her family focused on appearances, she was quietly building something that couldn't be given or taken away: her own empire, built entirely from her effort, her strategy, and her courage. And with each passing day, Amelie felt lighter, stronger, and more unstoppable than ever. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving, she was thriving, and no favoritism or family expectation could change that. A few months into Amelie's fintech venture, she heard some troubling news. Kofi's big idea had completely fallen apart. His business, which had been funded with gifts, loans, and family support, collapsed under poor planning and reckless spending. To Amelie's surprise, her phone rang late one evening. It was her mother, her voice shaky. "Amelie, can you help Kofi? He needs a loan," her mother pleaded. Amelie felt a mixture of irritation and disbelief. Kofi had been given every opportunity, yet here they were, turning to her as if she were a safety net. She paused, thinking carefully. She could help, but it had to be on her terms. "Okay," Amelie said slowly. "I'll help, but only if Kofi provides a proper business plan and attends the training sessions I'll set up. No shortcuts, no excuses." Her mother hesitated, then agreed. When Amelie explained the conditions to Kofi, he grumbled and rolled his eyes, clearly annoyed at being treated like a student. But in the end, he complied, mostly because he had no other option. As Amelie worked with him, she realized something important. Her family didn't really value responsibility. They praised charm and potential, but they didn't care much about hard work, discipline, or accountability. While Kofi sought handouts, Amelie had spent months building her own empire from scratch, slowly and steadily, without anyone's help. The experience only strengthened her determination. She reminded herself that real success could never be handed over or borrowed. No shortcuts, no favors, just skill, strategy, and perseverance. Watching Kofi struggle despite all the support only fueled her drive to prove that independence and self-earned achievements were far more powerful than any inheritance or family favoritism. By the end of the week, Kofi had learned a little about planning and accountability, but Amelie had learned something far bigger. Her worth and success depended on herself alone. She couldn't control her family's choices, but she could control her own path, and she was more determined than ever to walk it on her own terms. Within a year, Amelie's fintech consultancy had grown far beyond what she had imagined. What had started as a small operation helping a handful of local businesses now boasted high-profile clients, not only across Lusaka, but even in Johannesburg. Her reputation for being skilled, trustworthy, and ethical spread quickly. Word-of-mouth referrals brought in new clients every week, and Amelie began to feel the satisfaction of building something that was completely her own. Kofi still reached out occasionally, usually when a problem came up he couldn't handle. Amelie helped when she chose to, but she made sure he understood the rules. No shortcuts, no expecting her to bail him out without effort. Her parents, meanwhile, continued to live in blissful ignorance. At social events, they boasted endlessly about Kofi's charm and potential, never realizing that while they were admiring him, Amelie was quietly doubling the family wealth through her own ventures, carefully expanding her consultancy and creating financial security entirely on her. As her business grew, Amelie began to think beyond profit. She started mentoring young women in tech, hosting workshops and networking events, sharing tips and encouragement she had wished for when she was starting out. She built a network of loyal supporters, women who respected her skill and her perseverance. In guiding them, Amelie realized something important. Recognition earned through hard work and determination felt infinitely more powerful than the kind handed out by a biased family. Every meeting, every successful project, every client testimonial became a quiet victory. Amelie's confidence soared, not because someone praised her, but because she knew what she had built with her own effort. While Kofi's occasional successes were celebrated loudly, Amelie's steady rise was a reminder that true achievement doesn't need applause. It needs consistency, courage, and heart. By the end of the year, Amelie had not only grown her business and wealth, but also her influence and impact. She had transformed her anger and frustration into something unstoppable. The favoritism that had once hurt her no longer held power over. She was thriving, respected, and independent, a living proof that success is sweeter when it's self-earned, and that those who underestimate you often fuel your greatest victory. It was a warm Saturday afternoon, and the Chisoro family had gathered for one of their usual get-togethers. Laughter, food, and casual chatter filling the spacious living room. Amelie had arrived quietly, smiling politely as she always did, listening to her parents boast about Kofi's successes and charm. For years, she had stayed in the background, letting them have their spotlight. But today felt different. As the conversation drifted, her mother turned to Amelie casually, as if asking a polite question out of habit. "So, Amelie, what's new with you? How's life?" Amelie took a slow breath, smiling gently. She leaned back in her chair, keeping her tone calm and conversational. "I launched my company last year. We now have clients across Zambia and South Africa. Revenue has doubled every quarter." The room went silent. The air felt heavy for a moment, as if everyone were suddenly realizing they had been looking at her all wrong. Kofi's jaw tightened, his eyes widening slightly. He opened his mouth, then closed it, unsure what to say. Her mother fumbled, the usual confidence in her voice faltering. "Oh, we didn't know you were so successful," she said, glancing between Amelie and Kofi, awkward and unsure. Amelie smiled, a small, confident smile. She didn't need to boast. Her achievements spoke for themselves. For the first time in years, the power balance in the family had shifted. The daughter they had overlooked, ignored, and undervalued had quietly outgrown their expectations. She noticed the subtle tension, the unspoken realization in their eyes. They could no longer pretend she was invisible. She had built something no favoritism or family bias could touch. While they had focused on Kofi, Amelie had quietly surpassed them all, in wealth, influence, and respect. That day, Amelie felt a quiet sense of triumph. She had worked in silence, endured years of being overlooked, and emerged not only successful but unshakable. She had no need to demand recognition. It had arrived naturally, leaving her parents and Kofi to face the undeniable truth. Amelie was unstoppable. And for the first time in her life, she felt completely free, standing on her own terms. Word of Amelie's success spread faster than she expected. Family friends who had once dismissed her began talking about her achievements in hushed admiration. Invitations started coming in to speak at business conferences across Zambia, and soon even in South Africa. Local newspapers ran stories highlighting her journey, with headlines like, "The woman who built an empire while her family turned away." It was surreal for Amelie, seeing her hard work finally recognized beyond the small circle of clients she had started with. Her parents, who had once taken her for granted, could no longer ignore what they had overlooked. Slowly, they began to understand that their youngest daughter wasn't just surviving despite their favoritism. She was thriving in ways they hadn't imagined. Kofi, too, had to face the reality that Amelie's quiet determination had brought her further than anyone in the family had expected. Amelie knew she had a choice. She could let their shock and guilt dominate the conversation, or she could turn her experience into something bigger. She chose the latter. She began sharing her story publicly, talking about the years of being overlooked, the sacrifices she made, and the determination it took to build her consultancy from scratch. But she did it with purpose, not to shame her family, not to make them feel small, but to inspire others. She wanted women, especially those underestimated or ignored in their homes, schools, or workplaces, to see that they could rise on their own terms. At conferences, Amelie spoke with honesty and warmth. She shared practical advice, lessons she had learned, and the mindset shifts that had made the biggest difference. Audiences responded with standing ovations, messages flooding in from women who felt seen, encouraged, and empowered by her journey. Her Her story became more than a personal victory. It became a symbol of resilience, independence, and self-belief. Even in the midst of her public recognition, Amelie stayed grounded. She didn't flaunt her success to hurt anyone. She celebrated it to show what is possible when talent, effort, and determination meet courage. Slowly, her family began to respect the woman she had become, realizing that their favoritism had nothing to do with her ability to succeed. Amelie's journey had turned her pain into purpose, her invisibility into influence, and her determination into a movement that encouraged others to believe in themselves, no matter how the world around them tried to define their worth. One afternoon, Amelie received a call from her parents asking to meet her privately. Her heart tightened, memories of years of favoritism and being overlooked rushing back, but she agreed. She arrived at their home cautiously, prepared for anything. When the door closed behind her, the atmosphere was heavy with guilt and tension. Her father took a deep breath, his eyes avoiding hers at first. "Amelie, we didn't realize how wrong we were," he said, his voice filled with regret. "We were blinded by Kofi's charm. You've always been the real backbone of this family." Her mother nodded beside him, tears glistening in her eyes. They both looked smaller somehow, the confident figures Amelie had grown up with now humbled by the truth. Amelie listened quietly. She felt a mixture of emotions, relief, validation, but also caution. Years of being overlooked had taught her that words alone weren't enough. Forgiveness was possible, but boundaries were necessary. She took a slow breath, letting the moment settle before speaking. "I forgive you," Amelie said, her tone calm but firm. "But things will be different from now on. I will help Kofi and support the family, yes, but on my terms, not because you demand it. I have built my life, my company, and my independence through my own effort. That doesn't change just because you suddenly see it." Her parents nodded, their faces a mixture of shame and understanding. They realized that Amelie had grown stronger not in spite of them, but often because of her resilience against their favoritism. Amelie's calm and clarity shifted the energy in the room. This was no longer about seeking their approval or trying to compete with Kofi. It was about her own rules, her own life. She would help when she chose to, but she would never allow herself to be sidelined or undervalued again. By the end of the meeting, a sense of closure settled over Amelie. She had heard the apology she had long deserved, but more importantly, she had asserted her independence. Her parents could no longer take her sacrifices for granted. Amelie walked away with a quiet confidence, knowing she had forgiven, but also that she was finally in control, free to give and support, but never at the cost of her own worth or boundaries. The lights dimmed, and Amelie walked onto the stage at the Lusaka Women in Tech Summit. The audience quieted, hundreds of eyes fixed on her. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her journey, the years of being overlooked, the endless sacrifices, and the quiet determination that had carried her this far. "They gave everything to my brother, thinking he'd succeed. I was told I'd never be enough," she began, her voice steady. "But I built my empire, not for recognition, but for myself." The crowd listened, captivated. Every word was honest, every pause deliberate. Amelie spoke about her struggles with favoritism, the setbacks she had faced, and how she had turned anger and frustration into strategy and success. She shared how she had started her fintech consultancy from scratch, built clients across Zambia and South Africa, and created a life defined by her own choices. By the end of her speech, the applause was thunderous. Videos were shared instantly on social media, and her story went viral across Africa. People messaged her, thanking her for showing that independence, courage, and resilience could triumph even in the face of family bias. Women and men alike felt inspired by someone who had taken control of her life and refused to be defined by others' expectations. In the front row, her parents and Kofi sat in stunned silence. They had watched her rise quietly for years, and now it was undeniable. Amelie had surpassed everything they had given to Kofi. No gift, no inheritance, no favoritism could compete with the life she had built with her own hand. Amelie smiled, a soft, victorious smile. She was finally free of the weight of favoritism. She had her own wealth, her own respect, and her own path. The world was at her feet, and for the first time, she felt fully, completely unstoppable.